Watcher, White Wolf, Volume 4. Written by K. Matthew. Narrated by Hunter Millbrook. Watcher. Orion's youthfully handsome face was the first thing that Richard laid eyes on when he awoke. It would have been a pleasant surprise if not for the fact that it was followed by the sound of the lock snapping back in place around Richard's neck. He jerked in panic, and Orion quickly backed away, holding his hands up in a surrendering gesture. "What are you doing?" Richard stumbled over his words as he grasped at the thick metal collar around his neck. His eyes flitted down to the shirt that was clutched in Orion's fist, and a small pang of anger and insecurity flushed through his body as he realized he was completely naked, deprived of the only earthly good and shred of humanity he felt he still possessed. "Now I'm no better than a beast," Richard thought to himself. "An animal for their pleasure." Jackson stood a few feet away, looking down on Richard with dominant gray eyes. When Orion looked back at him for approval, Jackson nodded. Richard sat against the cave wall, pulling his knees to his chest to hide his nakedness, although the men had already seen every inch of him there was to see. It felt strange to suddenly realize how much he had taken the shirt for granted. Such a small piece of cloth had offered him so much comfort and warmth. Orion stood to whisper something to Jackson, tossing Richard's shirt against the opposite wall, well out of reach. Richard stared at it longingly, completely ignoring the conversation, which he was sure had something to do with him. The other men were stirring outside the cave, huddled around a small fire, sipping coffee and barely speaking, as normal. Jackson shortly went to join them and left Orion alone with Richard. "It will be you and me today," Orion told him, trying to mirror the look of intimidation that Jackson had given Richard earlier. It seemed less effective coming from such an Adonis, but Richard's cock twitched at the implication. He had already been forced to have sex with 2 of the men within the group, but this one he actually looked forward to. Richard had his eye on Orion from the moment he had seen his human form. Less than innocent thoughts of Orion had been threatening Richard's ideals of his sexuality ever since his first mating with Jackson. It had been an unsettling thought, actually wanting another man sexually, but Richard was quickly settling into it. Yes, he planned to enjoy Orion's body tonight and everything it had to offer. There would be no struggling. He simply felt no desire to, as thoughts of being held under the weight of Orion's heavenly blue eyes and the shadow of his muscular frame made Richard's cock twitch with delight. Richard moved his arms out of the way to expose himself to Orion, to put his pleasure at the notion on display. To Richard's surprise, Orion's cheeks flushed a rosy color as his eyes landed on Richard's thick manhood, and he quickly left the cave to join the pack. In a matter of a few hours, Jackson and the rest of the men headed off into the forest to hunt and gather, leaving Orion behind to guard Richard. This was their bonding time, and Richard planned to make the most of it. He even briefly wondered if he could seduce Orion into a little one-on-one action. It was odd having the other guys watch him every single time that he had sex. He longed for something more intimate, and he couldn't think of anyone better to share tender moments with than the man he desired the most. Orion walked up to Richard and offered him some berries. Remembering what had happened the previous day when Adam had offered him breakfast, Richard grinned as he reached for them, thinking about how this could possibly be the beginning of a very fun day. To his disappointment, Orion didn't retract his hand. There was no request for sexual stimulation in exchange for the berries.